Let me introduce Diane Auger, the Senior Vice President and Chief Strategist at St. Vincent's Medical Center in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I'm Andy Simon. I'm the President and CEO of Simon Associates Management Consultants, a corporate anthropologist. We work with companies that need or want to change. The topic today is building execution into strategy, how St. Vincent's Health Services effectively adapted to changing times. It's a pleasure to have Diane with me. I'm going to turn it over to her and we'll talk about what the story was at St. Vincent's and then what it teaches us about change.
Thanks, Andy. As Andy said, I serve as Chief Strategy Officer at St. Vincent's Medical Center in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I met Andy about 4 years ago when I joined St. Vincent's as a newbie to healthcare. Not new to the hospital, as I was actually born there many years ago. We are a mid-sized Catholic hospital and have been in our community for over 110 years. We began life as a daughter of Charity Hospital, and we're one of the original members of what is now known as Ascension, which is the largest Catholic health system in the country. We're about $480 million in revenue, and we have about 600 physicians on our medical staff. The Connecticut landscape for healthcare is a very challenging one right now. Rapid consolidation over the last several years, and a governor who has balanced the state budget largely on the backs of hospitals and has cut funding hundreds of millions of dollars over the last several years. So a very challenging financial environment as well. So the situation that Andy and I actually are talking about today, though, is about our primary care network. When I got to St. Vincent's and took a look at the strategic plan, what I found was that there was a high dependency on a primary care practice that had actually grown up at St. Vincent's. This was sort of a good news and bad news story. Andy and I actually interviewed a lot of those physicians when we began some research together. And we found that while this practice had actually grown up at St. Vincent's, they had found homes with the help of administrators. Their practices had flourished as the hospital had grown. And it was the good news, bad news story was that, you know, inherent in any kind of a relationship is that one party can walk away. And the potential was always that this group could get large enough that it could stand on its own and walk away from its relationship with St. Vincent's. And when I read the strategic plans for St. Vincent's, this risk was always identified, but nobody really thought that it would happen. And then it did. The group decided to accept bids for ownership, and it was actually acquired by our fiercest competitor. I'm not sure that we saw that coming, and even if we did, we weren't exactly prepared for that to happen. So we had to mobilize pretty quickly to develop our own primary care network. And by the way, we've been very successful in developing our inpatient specialty services and had largely ignored our outpatient world. And so our key challenges were that we had an undersized ambulatory network and we had an undersized physician network to support this large inpatient asset. And we also really weren't prepared for population health. So we needed to quickly look at securing our local market and prepare for population health. So we developed plans to support the initiatives, including developing a primary care network, looking at a clinically integrated network development, and becoming more retail and consumer focused so that we were putting ourselves out in the community and building our outpatient network as well. We developed the Primary Care Institute in 2014, and all initiatives related to primary care became part of this institute. To do that, we convened a multidisciplinary team. This was one of the first times that we took members from across our entire organization, and we had this sense of urgency that we needed to be sure that primary care became a driver for our organization. So members from across the organization were brought together. We created a steering committee for primary care, and just as important as the human resources were the financial resources. So we actually developed a capital request and we funded the Primary Care Institute for 5 years with restricted capital. The vision for the Primary Care Institute came from a lot of data. We collected a lot of data, including geographic data. Where were we strong? Where did we have good primary care connections? Where were the gaps that we needed to fill? What was the sequence of events that needed to occur to make sure that we were filling those gaps? What would our deliverables be? What were our consumers looking for? And ultimately, what would this all cost us? Most importantly, though, was that we had a lot of plans already. When I began looking at all the plans that we had at St. Vincent's, the capital funds that we had carried over years due to projects that hadn't been completed, issues with ownership, multiple priorities, and yet no real priorities, it was clear that we needed to plan to execute what we actually planned. And I'll say that again. It was clear we needed to plan to execute what we actually planned. So we first made the decision to create this institute, and then we socialized it across the organization. We identified the team, we resourced the team, and we empowered the team. We identified our modes of growth, and then we made decisions about how we would approach our geography. First, we would secure our core, and then we would move to our secondary service area. There was a lot of rigor around our implementation. We needed to make sure that we defined our scope of work very carefully. We created a management structure. Each committee had charters and identified their membership, and they were empowered to move forward. There was a rigor to their agendas, a cadence to their meetings. In short, we focused on executing on our plan. We identified our modes of growth, and our owners of each of our modes of growth were empowered to begin assembling their work groups. We looked at the short term and we looked at the long term. On the provider side of the equation, we had a group that specifically looked at recruitment, provider recruitment, alignment, growing providers in place, bringing new providers into the market, and then looking at a longer term provider pipeline by looking at the providers in our region that we were educating, we were assisting in terms of being their clinical partners. And then we took a look at new access points and clinical services, whether it be urgent care or retail clinics. And then we also looked at how we would begin to engage healthcare consumers, whether that was with partners or other modes of growth. We also looked at every single move, every single initiative in a wave. So we grouped our waves in first, second, third waves. Senior executives were identified to help lead every single wave, and each one of the waves had someone accountable to implement. When obstacles took place, which, they do, things get kind of stuck. We always had a small, super senior team every other week that I met with, and those obstacles were gotten out of the way, whether that meant it was a resource issue, we needed to apply additional resources somewhere, whether it was a system issue, or whether it was just, somebody needed to move out of the way to make something happen. We made sure that we got those waves moved forward and we got stuff done. So we've identified some of the key success factors here about how we moved this initiative forward over the last 2 years. They're pretty simple. We defined our intent quickly. We created this sense of urgency across the organization. We're a very mission-driven organization. Created over 100 years ago, we have an organizational mission to serve our community. So we knew that we needed to move quickly. We secured alignment on that priority. We secured capital for the Institute. We brought together an interdisciplinary team that really brought a lot of expertise and commitment to the Institute, and we made sure that we identified all of our priorities. I think most important, though, was that we had strategy working with operations so that as we moved strategy forward, we also had operations sort of informing the execution. And sometimes that can be sort of problematic for strategy leaders. I think that strategy needs to always keep operations working with them in tandem. That helps you execute the strategy even more quickly. So, this is sort of an oldie but a goodie, Larry Bossidy's book, Execution. There are tons of books on strategy and execution. Which one comes first? Does one drive the other? I think realistically, if you plan a strategy without making sure that your organization can execute it, you're really only doing half your job. As a strategy leader, I believe it's our job to really understand how to move that organization that you're leading forward by engaging the right people, ensuring that there's the why associated with the strategy, securing the resources that your organization needs to execute it, and that way you will really help to drive your organization forward.
Thank you, Diane. We'll come back to Diane at the end to see how it's actually been working, because it only is a good strategy if it's both executed well and delivers the results. My job today is to talk about how do you build execution into strategy? What are the hurdles, the methods, and the tools so that you can learn yourself about how to do this better? I begin here because since we are corporate anthropologists and work with lots of companies that are changing today, this is often what we found. And to some degree, Diane was talking about the old strategies at her organization that didn't seem to be going very far, but I sort of laughed at this. They had lots of meetings and generated tons of paper. I think you recognize those, but could not execute. I have a hunch you've seen that as well. So they are now history. And that's happening far too often today in too many industries. How do you build execution into strategy, though? And so my job is to talk about how do we ensure a well-designed strategy converts into that effective implementation, the hurdles and why we hate to change it, and how do we overcome them. One note of transparency, Diane and I have worked together for several years. We met basically at the same time she was joining the organization 4 years ago. This is not a project that I worked on, although I gave support in a variety of the primary care and urgent care research that was being done. So this is a strategy and execution that she owns. It's a great case study. And the reason we partnered for this webinar was that it seemed to work so well as an illustration of how to do execution around a good strategy really well. So let me share with you our perspective. First, as I tell my clients, you must have the right strategy. And they sort of roll their eyes. Sometimes they're not even sure they know what their strategy is. Sometimes it's a classic strategy where they're competing with others, and we'll talk more about that. Sometimes they're going to try and shape the market. Others are very innovative strategies, and they're coming up with new ideas. But if you don't know what your strategy is today and how well you're executing on it, in changing times, you're going to have a challenge to figure out what the next strategy ought to be, or how to adapt it, or whether it's working. The times are changing and very quickly in healthcare, but in lots of places. And so to adapt to the changing times, you're going to need a well-defined, integrated, cohesive approach, a clear, simple story. Now, we're going to talk a lot about strategy as storytelling, because the way the brain works is it takes the facts that your data have generated and turns it into a story that someone can understand. And the joy of watching Diane work with her team was that how she had to turn that, all the data into a story they could both understand and wrap their arms around. All strategies ask what customers or markets are we going to serve? And as you could hear her discussion, it was about which markets are open for us? Where do we have opportunity? What distinguishes us? How are we going to build this primary care network, urgent care system in order to capture those who have unmet needs and are non-users of a particular primary care doctor now? What's the value proposition? That branding question that answers why you? What key processes give you a competitive advantage so that you can not be just another or even the best, but maybe the only there? And what are the human, technological, organizational enablers of the strategy? So, and remember that Diane ended by saying we got to have the organizational guys, operational guys tied into the discoverers. There's discoverers and deliverers, and they need to work together. Now, I'm a blue ocean strategist, and we often look at those strategies that are going to set you up as another in the market space. And to some degree, this is not what Diane was doing, but what we often find is that the red ocean strategy is where we're going to do what others are doing. Well, do it maybe cheaper or better, but to win, you have to grab a bigger share of an existing market. It's extremely competitive, as you all know. In one healthcare system that I worked with, they were a safety net hospital. The competitor was the commercially insured hospital, and the third competitor was taking the suburban market. And everybody sort of knew their space. But if one won, the other lost, and it was a zero-sum game. What Diane was articulating is really a blue ocean strategy. If you're not familiar with blue ocean strategy, Renee Mabon and Chan Kim did tremendous research and launched a whole movement about 10, 11 years ago, and a new version of the book Blue Ocean Strategy came out this past February. It essentially is looking at a way to make the competition irrelevant. I'll say that 17 times, make the competition irrelevant by creating a real leap in value for both the company and its customers. You're looking for non-users and unmet needs and how to add value in an innovative way. Whether you're in a red ocean and trying to do a better strategy at what you know already, or you're looking at a new market space and trying to craft something innovative, you have a hard time implementing. I put this in because very often, if the senior leadership doesn't embrace that strategy, wrap its arms around it, and starts telling the strategic story, they undermine the whole effort that you're doing. And the pictures of the senior leadership here are often what we find. They really want to stop. They're very happy if they just continue to do what they've always done. They're discounting whatever you found. It's not personal, but professionally or otherwise, the brain hates to change. That too is something which the neurosciences are teaching us a great deal about. That prefrontal cortex is set up not to change very well. It's very miserly. It uses 25% of the brain's energy, and it doesn't like to learn new things. And that amygdala hijacks it. So even if the idea seems a good one, the emotions take over and it kills it. The second challenge is the comfort of the herd. People, humans, are herd animals. In case you haven't noticed, we live together, share a common culture, and that reinforces our basic values, beliefs, and behaviors. So we come to work every day and we know what to do and how to do it. That culture is our strength, but in changing times, it's also a great liability because more of the same isn't necessarily going to help you adapt to a new environment. And as Diane saw when she lost her primary care network, unless her culture changed, it was going to be hard to bring new things to market. The other problem is that birds of a feather flock together. I can only tell you, as we did our research together on the branding and rebranding and the new business growth, people came to St. Vincent's Medical Center because they felt wonderfully comfortable there. People said to us, that's where I belong. Patients said, that's where I belong. The whole belonging thing sounds very brandable, but it's really how humans come together where they feel most comfortable. That's also very difficult when it's time to change the comfort. Habits. We love to think that we're full of free will, but humans are basically driven by our habits. Now, if you're hearing all the roadblocks to change, we basically are much happier when we don't have to, which is why the times are very challenging. But you need to change. And whether it's a primary care network that left you, a consolidation that's pulled a major source of business out of your market, the healthcare reform or macro that's coming, somehow we're going to have to adapt. We typically go to look for the way to change, starting with the data. And I love this chart because it sort of sets out the path. And then from the data, we have to visualize the data to turn it into information that people can begin to understand. And really, what is the right data to begin to show us where to go? And the use of data by St. Vincent's was very powerful. But then she had to turn it into the right story, which is the insights or the knowledge that begin to help the brain understand it. What the brain does is creates a story, sorts reality to conform to it, and then continues to sort reality to affirm it, which means that new data is discounted, disregarded, ignored, for us to have motivation to change. So we have the heart and the head coming to change, and the heart doesn't want to do it, and the head doesn't know how to do it. I use this graph because it's complex. We have lots of perceptual filters that are taking the data and then sorting it to make which we think is relevant. And then we begin to create our scenarios, stories, to create our strategic plans, and it keeps going around and around and around. The story. So for a strategy to really work, we have to visualize it and turn it into a great story, which is what Diane had to do. Someone, St. Vincent's, wants something badly, a primary care network, more patients, and goes after it against all great odds, obstacles. Whether you're Iliad or you're Oedipus or you're the Trojan horse, we have good stories in our history, but they all basically come back to 7 plots. Overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, or rebirth. There are thousands of ways of telling the story, but there's fabulous data analysis that basically affirms what we've learned for a long time, that there are 7 basic history stories. Diane had a great story. And stories connect people. So St. Vincent's was the fallen hero that needed a rebirth. They weren't going to slay the dragon. There's a big dragon all around them. They can't slay it. It isn't a tragedy or a comedy. What was it? A rebirth. But with the data in hand, they went after it with great struggle, obstacles, hurdles, and hope that they could quickly tackle the well-established competitor who used to be their best buddies, ironically. Against great odds, they overcame the monster, restored the patients to their rightful home at St. Vincent's Medical Center. It's a perfect story of rebirth. Okay, so now you have the right strategy. It's become a wonderfully inspiring story. Now what? How to execute a great strategy. There are 4 basic hurdles that she faced and that you're going to face. First is the cognitive one. You have to wake employees up to the need for a strategic shift, and they are going to fight you lots of the way. The second is the resource hurdle. As she mentioned, she had to find a way to fund this, or it wasn't going to happen at all. But there is a basic assumption that the greater the shift in strategy, the greater the resources it requires for execution. But often that's not the case. It's a repurposing or refocusing. The motivational hurdle, you have to motivate key players to move fast and tenaciously. As she spoke about the PCI and the way in which it operates, this isn't easy. You have 10 different areas of the hospital having to work together along a common goal while they're doing their other day jobs. And the political one, which we all know about, and one manager put it so well, in our organization, you get shut down before you stand up. So we've got lots of hurdles. The limited resources, the cognitive ones, organization wedded to the status quo, the political opposition from powerfully vested interests, and the unmotivated staff. As you're thinking about your strategy, you need to overcome these, because it's only when all members of your organization are motivated to support it that a company has any chance. When Diane spoke about a plan to plan, I talk about a strategy needs a strategy. You need to think about this intentionally. If not, you get lucky if it works. So you got your strategy, you have your data supporting it, you have your story, it's a rebirth, and now we have to execute on it, overcoming these wonderful hurdles that everybody has in front of us. So how do we reduce the risk, inspire trust and commitment, inspire their voluntary cooperation, and build execution into strategy from the start? Because if not, it won't work. What Diane talked about with her PCI is to build engagement. It starts there. I must tell you, the most successful strategic initiatives come from team sport. And it's not a soloist who comes in or a consultant with their 6 steps. It's an engagement, it's experiential, and it's very much about taking a story and making it come alive. Then we've got to reach into fair process. The words fair process are very important. It's a key variable between successful strategic implementation and those that fail. People are looking to see how you're treating them in the process. This is based on tremendous neuroscience and cultural research that care as much about the justice of the process as they do about the outcome itself. They're more concerned about their roles in this story that's emerging. I like to think of it as theater and a play. And they have great satisfaction with the outcome and commitment to it. They all rise and celebrate when procedural fairness is exercised. How do you do fair process? Well, first begin with building strategy into people's buy-in up front. This isn't something she created and then sort of pushed out. It's something that the collaboration created together and then began to live. Engage them in the strategy-making process and keep talking. The neurosciences, when we're dealing with change, tell you to say it over and over and over again. Reach and frequency is not inconsistent or unimportant. People trust that a level playing field exists only if they keep hearing you say it does. Cooperation is interesting. You want them to cooperate voluntarily, not by mandate or direction. And you can't have people who object to it. You're taking something undesirable in their minds and making it very desirable. That process of converting an undesirable into desirable requires a great deal of collaboration, cooperation, communication. If they're going to voluntarily cooperate, it's not mechanical. You don't want them to do only what it takes to get by. You have to celebrate that they're going beyond the call of duty, beyond their own abilities. This is not unimportant. They will not have skills to change. Most people do not build on their skills to change. Until you give them a way of doing it, they don't really believe they can do it. And now you have to subordinate their own self-interest to execute a resulting strategy. We work with 3 principles. engagement, explanation, and expectation clarity. Why does it matter? People emotionally are seeking recognition of their value. I can't say that often enough. You can't ignore them, put them aside, tell them, you do your job, I'll take you someplace new. They want to be on the bus with you. They're not as employees, but as people who want to be treated with full respect and dignity and appreciated for their individual worth. This is about moving people forward. If you ignore the fair process, they will feel intellectual indignation. I have a hunch you've experienced that. Not share ideas or expertise and basically say, not going to tell them. Hoard their best thinking and creativity, undermining you, sabotaging the process, particularly those leaders, those informal leaders who are influencers in each of the areas. And they won't trust the strategic decisions being made. They will be I told you so's right away. So good strategy execution is really based largely on motivating people. You have to overcome those organizational hurdles. They're there. Whether you believe they are now or not, keep looking for them. They're there. You have to win trust with fair process. They have to be part of the whole engagement, and you can't over communicate with them often enough. Celebrate small wins. Don't ignore the rituals that humans like that symbolize what's happening. And it demands a very holistic approach to formulating the execution of a strategy. This is some great research from Glassdoor. They did research of 2,000 employees. What motivates them to work harder? Hugs, appreciation, not the fear of losing a job, but positives. So I'm going to turn this back to Diane because it's time that we now learn what did St. Vincent's actually do to convert a great strategy into a winning execution, and how did it work?
So I think what we've learned is that we really shouldn't wait for a crisis to implement a strategy really well. And I think from St. Vincent's standpoint, we have learned that we should continually be looking at strategy as a way to continue to strengthen our organization. As I reflected back with Andy when we were pulling together this presentation on this process, I think on the engagement side, we had full engagement of our group, and that was the WHO, that interdisciplinary group. We continue to this day as a PCI steering committee, and we've actually engaged a lot more people in that group than even when we first began. We have a sense of urgency, as I said, the why, because of our mission to serve, and the Daughters of Charity who founded us, our feeling of ensuring that we made this organization continue far into the future. We knew that we needed to begin to build our own new network, and so the why was certainly right there up front. And then the clarity of expectation, the what, we understood that what we were going to build together and deliver was going to mean something to our organization going forward. And so, so the progress report so far, I refer to the PCI as a launching pad and a landing pad because of the umbrella organization that the PCI became. We actually sort of became this owner of a lot of orphan projects in our organization. And the example that I would give you is that we found a lot of urgent care opportunities, and there was actually a capital fund that had been established for urgent care that had gone unused for several years. There was a strategy for urgent care that had no owner. And so we put that under the PCI, and in 2 years, we've opened 4 new urgent care centers. So now have a total of 8. We coupled them actually with primary care. So we have urgent care and primary care together in 4 of those centers. And we call that also a launching pad for PCI because we've also included online scheduling capability. So PCI has become a landing pad for some of our orphan projects and a launching pad for some of our new projects. We have brought many new primary care practitioners into our market. We've aligned with others that we were not aligned with. We launched e-visits in 2016 through the PCI, and we've actually used the PCI as a model for the way that we we're launching other opportunities and other service lines. So we have a women's health service line initiative, and we use the PCI as a model for a way to bring a steering committee together. And now we're looking at joint ventures because we're getting better at using interdisciplinary teams across our organization. So it's been a good way for us to change our culture to really have teams working across our organization that trust each other, that understand how to be engaged with each other, and understand that we can deliver strategy and execution at the same time. And so, I like this picture because I believe it illustrates that our story has changed from the story that I told you in the beginning of this presentation. We're not dependent on one partner anymore. We now view ourselves as a system of care, and we must build and nourish multiple relationships. That is going to be the way that we serve people who depend on us in the future, and the way that we will continue to serve our mission.